and the next day, and next year, and the year after that, I'm shaking the dust of this crummy little town off my feet, and I'm gonna see the world.
The FBI investigated It's a Wonderful Life for being communist propaganda. But they missed something even more shocking: the scene where George's car moves by itself between shots. From disappearing pipes to magic wreaths, we're exposing the mind-blowing mistakes that will change how you watch this Christmas classic forever. The last one is so obvious, you'll wonder how anyone missed it. The story of It's a Wonderful Life began long before Hollywood took notice. In November 1939, Philip Van Doren Stern, a historian and author, wrote a short story called The Greatest Gift. It was about a man named George Pratt who stood on a bridge one Christmas Eve, ready to end his life. Before he could jump, a mysterious stranger appeared and gave him a chance to see what the world would be like if he had never been born. What George saw changed everything. He realized how much he had meant to those around him. Stern believed in the story, but no publisher was interested. After years of rejection, he decided to print 200 copies himself in 1943. Instead of selling them, he sent them out as Christmas cards to friends and family. One of those cards ended up in the hands of an agent who brought it to Hollywood. RKO Pictures saw potential and bought the rights for $10,000, hoping to turn it into a film for Cary Grant. But something wasn't working. Several screenplays were written, yet none of them captured the heart of Stern's story. By late 1945, RKO gave up and decided to sell the rights. That's when Frank Capra stepped in. He had just returned from serving in World War II and was looking for a meaningful project. He bought the rights for the same $10,000 RKO had paid and immediately knew who should play the lead. James Stewart, a decorated war pilot, was also back from service and searching for a role that mattered. This was more than just another film for Capra. During the war, he had directed a series of propaganda films for the U.S. Army called Why We Fight. That experience changed him. When he returned to Hollywood, he wanted to make movies that inspired people. So in 1945, he and fellow directors William Wyler and George Stevens founded Liberty Films, an independent company that could operate without studio interference. It's a Wonderful Life became their first major project. But making the film wasn't easy. Liberty Films was new, and financing a big production was a massive risk. They borrowed $1.54 million from Bank of America, but the costs quickly rose to $3.78 million. It was a gamble for a company that had never released a film before, but Capra believed in the story. James Stewart's role as George Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life was shaped by his real-life experiences in World War II. He was the first major Hollywood star to enlist after Pearl Harbor, flying 20 combat missions over Nazi-occupied Europe as a B-24 bomber pilot. The war changed him, and that weight shows in his performance. George starts out hopeful, dreaming of leaving Bedford Falls. But as responsibilities pile up, frustration and exhaustion take over. By the time he reaches the bridge, contemplating suicide, Stewart doesn't just act, he feels like a man at his breaking point. His raw, emotional performance reflected what many veterans experienced after returning home. Donna Reed's Mary Hatch is more than just a love interest. She sees George's potential before he does, and holds the family together when things fall apart. In a time when female roles were often one-dimensional, Reed gave Mary strength and agency. Off-screen, she later became a cultural icon in The Donna Reed Show, but this role proved her depth as an actress. Lionel Barrymore's Mr. Potter is one of cinema's greatest villains. Cold and ruthless, he represents greed and corruption. When Uncle Billy loses $8,000, Potter takes it without hesitation, nearly driving George to suicide. Barrymore, confined to a wheelchair due to arthritis, used his physical limitations to make Potter even more menacing. Henry Travers's Clarence brings warmth and humor as George's guardian angel. He isn't powerful or wise, but his kindness is unwavering. By showing George a world where he was never born, he helps him realize his worth. His final message, "No man is a failure who has friends," sums up the film's theme. Making snow look real in It's a Wonderful Life was a challenge that led to a major breakthrough in film effects. In 1946, most movies used bleached cornflakes for snow. They looked good on camera, but created a serious problem. Every step actors took made a loud crunching sound, making it impossible to record dialogue. On top of that, they didn't behave like real snow. No footprints, no tire tracks. Director Frank Capra knew this wouldn't work, so he turned to special effects artist Russell Shearman for a better solution. Shearman and the RKO effects team came up with something completely new. Instead of cornflakes, they used foamite, a substance found in fire extinguishers. By mixing it with soap flakes, water, and sugar, they created artificial snow that could be sprayed onto the set. Large fans helped spread it around, creating a natural snowfall that was completely silent. For the first time, actors could perform in falling snow without needing to redo their lines later. This breakthrough was so important that it won a special award from the Motion Picture Academy in 1948. But this new snow had its own problems. The soap-based mixture made the ground dangerously slippery, turning parts of the set into a hazard. Crew members had to move carefully to avoid accidents. Even with this challenge, the invention became a game-changer. It set a new standard for winter scenes in movies and influenced film techniques for years to come. Despite all the effort to create a perfect winter setting, filming took place during a brutal summer. It's a Wonderful Life was shot in the middle of a heat wave in California. At RKO's Encino Ranch, temperatures soared over 90 degrees Fahrenheit, 32 degrees Celsius. The heat was unbearable. James Stewart, who played George Bailey, could be seen sweating in several scenes, especially during his emotional breakdown on the bridge. It wasn't planned, but the heat made his performance feel even more raw and intense. The conditions were so bad that director Frank Capra had to shut down production for a day. The cast and crew were exhausted. Shooting a Christmas movie in the middle of summer was already tough, but this level of heat made it even harder. Still, Capra pushed forward, determined to bring his vision to life. Stewart had almost passed on the role entirely. After returning from World War II, he wasn't sure if he wanted to keep acting. It was Lionel Barrymore, the actor who played Mr. Potter, who convinced him to take the part. Looking back, Stewart later called It's a Wonderful Life his favorite film of his entire career, a career that spanned 6 decades. To make Bedford Falls feel like a real town, Capra had an entire set built from scratch. The construction took 2 months and covered 4 acres of RKO's Encino Ranch. More than 70 buildings were designed to look lived in, complete with aged storefronts and homes full of character. The main street stretched 300 yards, the size of 3 city blocks. The set even had a factory district and a tree-lined parkway with 20 full-grown oak trees that were transplanted onto the lot. It was one of the largest and most detailed sets ever built for an American film at the time. To add to the realism, Capra wanted Bedford Falls to feel like it had existed for decades. The buildings were carefully aged to look weathered. Details like old signs, worn-down sidewalks, and familiar small-town touches made the town feel alive. The effort paid off. When audiences watched It's a Wonderful Life, Bedford Falls felt real, like a place that could actually exist. But the town didn't last. By the 1950s, RKO sold the Encino Ranch to developers. Most of the Bedford Falls set was torn down to make way for new housing. Today, only 2 locations from the film remain. The swimming pool from the famous dance scene is still at Beverly Hills High School. Martini's house, located in La Cañada Flintridge, also still stands. Everything else is gone. Even the most carefully made films have mistakes, and It's a Wonderful Life is no exception. This 1946 holiday classic is filled with heartwarming moments, but if you look closely, you'll also find some surprising bloopers. Some are funny, others were pure accidents that made the final cut, and a few just don't make sense. One of the funniest slip-ups happens during the Charleston Dance Contest. George Bailey and Mary Hatch are caught up in the excitement, completely unaware that the gym floor beneath them is about to open. The moment is already chaotic, with people falling into the hidden swimming pool. But there's something most viewers never notice. As James Stewart climbs out of the water, his toupee briefly slips out of place. By 1946, Stewart was in his late 30s and had started relying on hairpieces to maintain his leading man look. The wet hair and sudden movement must have been too much for the toupee, and for a split second, his real hairline is visible. But with so much happening in the scene, the mistake goes unnoticed. Director Frank Capra was known for letting small imperfections slide if they added to the energy of a scene, and this one stayed in. Then there's the famous Uncle Billy blooper, which came with an unexpected cash bonus. The scene takes place right after George and Uncle Billy finish a conversation. As Uncle Billy drunkenly stumbles away, a loud crash is heard off-screen. The noise wasn't planned. A crew member had accidentally knocked over some props, creating a huge racket. But instead of breaking character, Thomas Mitchell, who played Uncle Billy, reacted instantly. He slurred out, "I'm all right! I'm all right!" and kept walking. The line fit his character so well that Capra decided to leave it in. He was so pleased with how natural it felt that he gave the crew member who caused the accident a $10 bonus, which would be worth about $150 today. This happy accident made Uncle Billy's character even more lovable and proved that sometimes the best moments in movies happen by mistake. Not all the film's errors were as entertaining. Some were just strange, like the disappearing pipe. In one scene, George Bailey is at the building and loan office, talking to Violet Bick. As he listens to her, he holds a pipe in his mouth. But when he reaches for money to give her, the pipe is suddenly gone. No explanation, no transition, just gone. Continuity errors like this happened often in classic films because scenes were shot at different times, sometimes out of order. Someone on set probably forgot to give Stewart the pipe again, and the mistake slipped through editing. It's a small detail, but once you notice it, you can't unsee it. Then there's the ice cream that defies logic. Early in the movie, young George Bailey serves Mary Hatch an ice cream dish topped with coconut, even though she specifically says she doesn't want it. That's already funny, but what happens next is even stranger. George runs an errand that takes over an hour, which is confirmed by a phone call from Mr. Gower. Yet when he returns, Mary is still sitting at the counter with her ice cream looking exactly the same. No melting, no puddle, just a perfect frozen scoop. This mistake probably happened because scenes were filmed separately, and no one thought to swap in a melted version of the ice cream. Back in 1946, continuity wasn't as closely monitored as it is today, so small details like this sometimes slipped through. But for modern viewers, it's an amusing reminder that even classic films have their quirks. Moreover, during George Bailey's tense meeting with Mr. Potter, something strange appears in the background. While George leans over Potter's desk, a modern car with a chrome door handle is clearly visible through the window. This wouldn't be an issue in most films, but It's a Wonderful Life is set between the 1910s and 1940s. chrome-plated cars with such features weren't common until the late 1940s or early 1950s, making this a clear mistake. The film does an incredible job of creating the world of Bedford Falls. Everything from the costumes to the props feels authentic to the time. Director Frank Capra made sure the town looked like small-town America from decades past. Yet, this car slipped into the frame, breaking the illusion for anyone who notices. It was likely parked near the studio lot or on a nearby street used for exterior shots. Filmmakers didn't have full control over every background detail, especially when shooting in semi-public areas. For years, this mistake went unnoticed, but today, it's a favorite among fans who love spotting small details. Instead of ruining the scene, it adds an unexpected charm, and in a way, it's ironic. While George pleads for a second chance, a car from the future waits outside, almost as if reminding him that time always moves forward. A different kind of mistake happens near the end of the movie. George rushes into the building and loan office, a Christmas wreath draped over his arm. He places it on a table before answering the phone. But in the next shot, it's back on his arm as if it was never moved. No one touches it. No one puts it back. It's just there again. Continuity errors like this are common in movies, especially when scenes are shot out of order. It's possible that this moment was a reshoot, and someone forgot where the wreath was supposed to be. Editing mistakes like this happen all the time, but this one is oddly fitting. Some fans even joke that Clarence, George's guardian angel, was behind the wreath's sudden reappearance. After all, if he can turn back time, moving a Christmas wreath is nothing. Another mistake happens during one of the most emotional scenes. George, overwhelmed by stress, snaps at his family. He kicks things, yells, and ruffles his hair in frustration. It's a powerful moment, showing just how much pressure he's under. But in the very next shot, his hair is neat again, perfectly combed as if nothing happened. This mistake likely happened because multiple takes were used to piece the scene together. Between takes, actors often get their hair and makeup fixed. But in this case, someone overcorrected. It's a small detail, but for those who notice, it adds an unintended moment of humor. 1 second, George looks completely disheveled. The next, he looks like he just left the barber shop. But it doesn't take away from the scene. If anything, it reminds us how difficult it is to keep continuity perfect, especially in high-energy moments. And it adds to the film's charm. After all, who wouldn't want their problems to disappear as easily as George's messy hair? One of the most subtle bloopers appears in an early scene at Mr. Gower's drugstore. Young Mary leans in to whisper to young George. It's a sweet moment, hinting at the romance that will grow between them. But on the counter, there's something that doesn't belong. A small piece of tape. This wasn't part of the set. It was a marker meant to show the actors exactly where to stand. Filmmakers use these all the time to make sure people hit their marks for the best lighting and camera angles. Normally, they are removed before shooting, but this one was left behind. In 1946, when It's a Wonderful Life was made, fixing mistakes like this wasn't easy. Today, digital tools can erase small details, but back then, fixing an error meant reshooting an entire scene. This tape marker stayed in the final cut, offering a rare behind-the-scenes glimpse into Hollywood's golden age. George Bailey's crash scene in It's a Wonderful Life has one of the most obvious continuity errors in the film. After everything goes wrong for him, he slams his car into a tree near Martini's place. The first time we see the crash, the car is pressed straight against the tree, and both headlights are still intact. But in the next shots, something changes. The car has shifted slightly to the side, and now one of its headlights is gone. It's the kind of mistake that stands out once you notice it. The scene is already intense, showing George at his lowest point, but the moving car breaks the illusion and makes you wonder how it wasn't caught during editing. Some believe this happened because of reshoots or technical limitations on set. No official explanation has ever been given, but the filming conditions may have played a part. This scene was shot in the summer of 1946, when temperatures reached 90 degrees. The production team had to create a winter setting despite the heat, using a mix of foamite, soap flakes, water, and sugar to make fake snow. This technique was so advanced that it won a technical award from the Academy. But working under these conditions wasn't easy. The extreme heat and the challenges of handling artificial snow may have caused small continuity errors like this one. Even with mistakes, fans still loved the film. Instead of ruining the experience, these little errors add character. Many see them as a reminder of the time when films were made with practical effects, real sets, and no digital corrections. Another mistake appears in one of the film's most dramatic scenes. Clarence jumps into the freezing river, forcing George to save him. As George swims toward him, Clarence screams for help. But something is off. His mouth stays closed while the cries are heard. The audio and visuals don't match at all, making the moment feel strange, even though it's supposed to be serious. This mistake likely happened because of how sound was recorded in 1946. Live audio wasn't always reliable, especially outdoors or near water, so actors often recorded lines later in a studio. In this case, Clarence's cries were probably added in post-production, but weren't perfectly timed with his mouth movements. It's a small mistake, but in such a crucial moment, it stands out. Most viewers don't mind because Clarence is such a beloved character. Played by Henry Travers, he brings warmth and humor to the story, making it easy to overlook technical flaws. Even in this scene, there's something more interesting going on behind the scenes. The heavy snowfall wasn't real. It was created using 6,000 gallons of artificial snow. At the time, most films used painted cornflakes for snow, but that method was too loud for scenes with dialogue. The special effects team came up with a quieter, more realistic alternative, which ended up changing how winter scenes were filmed in Hollywood. Another strange inconsistency in the film involves Harry Bailey's age. When Clarence shows George what life would be like if he had never been born, he explains that Harry drowned as a child because no one was there to save him. He even says Harry was 9 years old when he died. But when the camera shows Harry's tombstone, the dates don't match. It says he was born in 1911 and died in 1919, which means he was only 7 or 8. This mistake has been debated for years. Some believe it was just a script error. Others think Henry Travers may have said the wrong age during filming, and no one caught it. Since Harry's fate is so important to the story, it's surprising that the numbers don't add up. Some fans have tried to explain it in different ways. One theory is that Clarence, despite being an angel, isn't perfect when it comes to human details. He's forgetful at times, so it's possible he simply got the age wrong. Others think it's just a product of how films were made back then. In the 1940s, movies were shot on tight schedules, and small errors weren't always seen as a big deal. It's a Wonderful Life is one of the most beloved Christmas movies of all time. But in 1947, the FBI saw it as something far more dangerous. At the height of Cold War paranoia, an internal memo labeled the film as a possible example of communist infiltration in Hollywood. The reason? The movie painted bankers in a bad light. The FBI pointed to Mr. Potter, the wealthy and ruthless banker, as a problem. They saw his portrayal as an attack on capitalism. According to the memo, this was a tactic used by communists to spread distrust in American institutions. The idea that George Bailey's small community bank was the good alternative to Mr. Potter's greed was viewed as promoting collectivist ideals over free enterprise. HUAC, the House Un-American Activities Committee, took the concerns seriously. The government was already cracking down on suspected communist influence in Hollywood, blacklisting actors and filmmakers. But in the end, HUAC did not move forward with an investigation. The irony is that the very themes that raised red flags, community, generosity, and standing up to corruption, are what make the film so powerful today. Political controversy wasn't the only reason the film sparked debate. One of the most discussed moments happens when George Bailey sees an alternate version of reality where he was never born. In this version of the world, his wife Mary is unmarried, shy, and working as a librarian. The film presents this as a tragedy, as if her life is empty without marriage. For many modern viewers, this moment is unsettling. It reinforces the outdated idea that a woman's happiness is tied to having a husband and family. The spinster librarian trope had been used in films before. A quiet, timid woman who is seen as repressed and lonely. Here, it suggests that without George, Mary's life has little meaning. Some argue that this isn't the point of the scene. They see it as a way to highlight how deeply connected George and Mary's lives are. It's not saying Mary is worthless without a husband, but rather showing how love changes both of them. But even within their marriage, Mary's sacrifices go unnoticed. She helps save the Bailey building and loan, supports George through every crisis, and raises their family. Yet the story always focuses on George's struggles, while Mary is expected to accept her role without question. Beyond politics and gender roles, the film raises an even bigger question. What does it really mean to live a fulfilling life? George Bailey spends most of the movie giving up his dreams. He wants to travel the world, build skyscrapers, and be an architect. Instead, he stays in Bedford Falls, taking over the family business and helping others. His darkest moment comes on Christmas Eve, when he feels trapped and believes his life has been wasted. Even after his realization at the end, nothing about his circumstances changes. He doesn't get to chase his dreams. He just learns to see his sacrifices in a new light. Some believe the film has a bittersweet message. It suggests that happiness isn't about personal achievement, but about making a difference in other people's lives. Philosophers have linked this idea to objective list theories, which argue that true fulfillment comes from things like relationships and community rather than personal success. By this measure, George's life is full of meaning. He helps his town, saves families from financial ruin, and is surrounded by people who love him. But others see a more complicated message. They argue that the film also warns about how society pressures people to sacrifice their dreams for duty. George does the right thing, but does that mean he's truly happy? His joy at the end is real, but it comes from accepting his role rather than changing his life. When It's a Wonderful Life was released in 1946, it was anything but a hit. The film made just $3.3 million worldwide. Its budget alone was $3.18 million. And that didn't even include marketing and distribution costs. Liberty Films, the production company Frank Capra had founded, had borrowed over $1.5 million to make it. When the movie failed to make a profit, the company was forced to sell to Paramount Pictures in 1947. One of the biggest reasons for its failure was timing. Just a few weeks earlier, The Best Years of Our Lives had hit theaters. Directed by William Wyler, it told the story of World War II veterans adjusting to civilian life. The film struck a chord with audiences, winning 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. It's a Wonderful Life had 5 nominations, but won only 1, for its innovative fake snow effects. Beyond competition, audiences in post-war America weren't drawn to the film's themes of sacrifice and hardship. Many people wanted something more uplifting, something that let them escape reality. Even critics weren't sure what to make of it. Some appreciated its hopeful message, but others found it too sentimental. They called it Capricorn, dismissing its small-town optimism as unrealistic. James Stewart's performance as George Bailey did receive praise, but even he later admitted that the film's message may have been too heavy for a nation still recovering from war. Instead of the warm reception Capra had hoped for, It's a Wonderful Life faded into the background. Still, the film had at least one lasting achievement. Hollywood had long struggled with creating realistic snow on screen. Most films used painted cornflakes, but they were noisy and crunched underfoot, making it difficult to record dialogue. Capra's team developed a new method using a mix of fire extinguisher foam, sugar, and water. The result looked real and was silent on set. This breakthrough earned the movie an Academy Award for technical achievement. For Capra, the failure of It's a Wonderful Life marked the beginning of the end. He had been one of Hollywood's most respected directors, but after this, he made only 5 more films. None matched the success of his earlier work. It seemed like It's a Wonderful Life was destined to be forgotten. Then, nearly 30 years later, everything changed. In 1974, an administrative error caused the film's copyright to lapse. Suddenly, any TV station could air it for free. Broadcasters jumped at the chance to fill airtime with a well-made movie that cost them nothing. During the late 1970s and early 1980s, It's a Wonderful Life played on television every December. People who had never seen it before were drawn in by its message of hope. Families made it a Christmas tradition. As America went through economic struggles and cultural shifts, the film's themes of resilience and community took on new meaning. By 1992, It's a Wonderful Life had become so popular that NBC secured exclusive rights. Republic Pictures had managed to restore partial copyright protections based on the short story the film was based on, The Greatest Gift. Since then, NBC has aired it every Christmas Eve without fail. What started as a commercial failure became one of the most beloved holiday films in history. Even Capra was surprised by its revival. He once said, "The film has a life of its own now. I didn't even think of it as a Christmas story when I first ran across it.